Hello, this is Tom Burke. I'm the organization secretary for the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. We're getting together with a few comrades today to talk about FRSO and Solidarity with Venezuela, with the Bolivarian revolution that is ongoing in Venezuela. I am a labor and anti-war activist for many years now. And I'm also one of the anti-war 23, one of the 23 anti-war activists rated by the FBI back in 2010. Hello, this is Tom Burke. I'm the organization secretary for the jury, and we beat back that attack, and we're very happy about it. We're still out here organizing with you all. What the Freedom Road Socialist Organization stands for, here's my shirt with the logo, is we are for revolution, we are for socialism, and we are for liberation. We're a Marxist-Leninist group in the United States, and you can join the FRSO at our website. You can go there and send us a message of solidarity and donate. We like donations, so donations help us to do our work, and we're growing quickly throughout the US. We exist in more than 25 cities across the US now, and things are going well for the revolution. We also publish Fight Back News, which you can find online. And if you go there today, you will find the main article is a statement from President Maduro of Venezuela. So it ties in well to what we're doing. I want to introduce the other panelist here, Jared Hamil. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jared Hamil. I live in Los Angeles. I'm a community activist, and I'm a UPS driver, rank and file teamster, and shop steward. Longtime activist against U.S. wars and aggression from Iraq to Palestine to Venezuela. I urge people to support and defend people against imperialism, and I'm also a member of Freedom Road Socialist Organization.
Thank you. How about you, Sarah Martin?
Hi, I'm Sarah Martin. Really glad to be here today. And I too am a member of Freedom Road. Here's my shirt, the team shirt, right? I'm also a member of an organization called Women Against Military Madness here in Minneapolis. And we've been around for 38 years, and I've been active all that time and before that also, as you can probably tell. And I was very lucky to have gone to Venezuela twice in 1 year, once in March of 2019, and then again in January of 2020. So the first one was with U.S. Peace Council delegation, and the second was a Freedom Road delegation. With happy to be here. I'm one of the 23, actually.
Oh, that's right.
Yes.
And now I want to introduce Emily Butt, my fellow Michigander.
Hello, my name is Emily Butt. I am a UPS Teamster, rank and file labor activist. Been a Teamster for 8 years, member of FRSO for the last 2. I got to go to Venezuela in March for a week and have a lot of experiences that I'm looking forward to talking about.
All right, thank you. So for the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, a few years ago, we began to step up our solidarity work with the Venezuelan revolution, with the Bolivarian revolution, and meeting and getting acquainted with and building solidarity with the United Socialist Party of Venezuela, the PSUV. And at the same time, this is because we saw, you know, the revolution's been going on for over 20 years in Venezuela. I would say the big turning point was when Hugo Chavez was elected and began a new process and a kind of a new sense of what democracy could be inside a country in Latin America. So there's a 20-year history at this point of progress, but we saw the US under Barack Obama was, you know, putting in place the architecture for a repressive foreign policy towards Venezuela, and one that would prepare for war, besides the dirty tricks like the coup d'etat they attempted, escalation. And so in response to that FRSO said, let's put a little more time and effort towards solidarity and, getting people to oppose, whether it's Democrats or Republicans, doesn't matter to us. We're opposed to US threats, US intervention, and US war against Venezuela. So the reason it's happening is because the working class power continues to grow in Venezuela. The Venezuelans themselves do not say they have socialism because most of the economy still remains in the hands of big capitalists. There's billionaires, there's multimillionaires, and other smaller capitalists, and most of the economy remains in their hands. So they're still discussing and debating, and it's what makes it really interesting for us. What is socialism? How do we achieve it? How do we get there? So today, the US government's using its Navy, trying to block and harass Iranian ships that are bringing much needed petrochemicals so they can refine oil in Venezuela. Venezuela has one of the biggest oil reserves in the world, but they're having difficulty because of the US blockade of being able to even refine the oil. Oil's very cheap there. It costs less than 50 cents to fill a tank of gas, but it's become difficult due to the US blockade. There's also US mercenaries who are attacking them. They use narco trafficking gangs from Colombia to attack inside Venezuela. So things are more difficult for the Venezuelan government and especially for the people. At the same time that you would think international solidarity becomes more important, and that's what we're trying to do, you also see inside the US parts of our movement, in particular people with what we call social democratic ideas or Trotskyist ideas, are of it, and they have a lot of things to say, which we think it's wrong to do. We think when there's trouble for other movements, we need to be their best friends. We need to act in solidarity with them, but not the social democrats. For example, Bernie Sanders takes it upon himself to call Hugo Chavez, who initiated this revolution, he calls him a dead communist dictator live on TV, So while Bernie may say a lot of good things, we're taking him to task for this. We can't stand it when he calls our friends insults, The other thing is the current leader, President Maduro, who's won far more elections than most people in the US Senate, or more elections than Republicans in the last 20 years who ran for president. They all have to have the courts decide them, or this undemocratic electoral college deciding it. At least Maduro wins his elections. Bernie took it upon himself to call him a vicious tyrant during one of the debates. It's outrageous. So we have a very different view of Maduro. We think he's a fine leader. I wish he was the president of our country, actually, so we could have more democracy in our country. Also, we are doing international solidarity because of a principle called Proletarian Internationalism. And that means that workers in this country, when we're in struggle, we need to stand with the workers in the other countries as proletarians as they fight Wall Street with us. Because in most of the countries of Latin America, not Cuba, but most of the other ones, Wall Street dominates their economies. Wall Street dictates what the agenda is. And that's another break that Maduro has made. He's not letting Wall Street decide, and that's why they're trying to punish him now by using the US Navy. So we stand for international solidarity, and we stand particularly for proletarian internationalism. That's who we are. We say when Cuba ran the mafia and the US corporations out of Cuba, that's good for US workers. It actually helps us to fight Wall Street. When the Vietnamese defeated the US in the war, we say that's also good for US workers. We're happy about it. We think it advances us towards our goal of achieving socialism in this country. So we like it when the PSUV stands up and opposes US imperialism. And we look forward to December 6th when there's an election and Maduro and the PSUV win another decisive victory because they've won 24 out of the last 26 elections. we look forward to that day, because when they win, we win. That's our view of things. Lastly, I want to say about Venezuela that it was one of the most advanced economies in Latin America. It wasn't like there was a terrible economy in place. The problem for Venezuela was the economy was all based around its oil industry, and the US controlled the profits from that industry. And so they had kind of this odd economy that didn't develop like the food industry. They were importing 80% of their food. And then a lot of workers were living in what we call shanty towns. At least that's what Irish Americans call them. They were living in slums. And there's one on the east side of Caracas that has 500,000 people, mostly from Colombia, called Petare. And it's cinder blocks and tin roofs and plastic doorways. And, you know, that's no way for people to live. So even though they had an advanced economy, the reason the revolution's happening, seeing what's happening in Venezuela and who you met and talked to. And I thought maybe, Sarah, you could start off by telling us some of your experiences.
Well, the highlight of the first trip in March of 2019 was we actually did meet with President Nicolas Maduro for an hour and a half, which was really something. He's a very charismatic, powerful presence, and also very engaging. And he gave us, you know, most people knew the history, but he ran through that history again and talked about how important it is that we were there, and that what they're doing is so important, that that the future of humanity depends on what happens to them, and it's a fight between socialism and capitalism, and that's how we see it too. So also. I happened to tell him at the end of that conversation, and it was true, that the anti-war committee here in Minneapolis was doing a Hands Off Venezuela demonstration at that very moment in Minneapolis in front of a senator's office. So he really got a kick out of that. Not only got a kick out of it, but he thought that was very important. And in his news conference talked about that, and then tweeted that out to his however many tens of thousands of followers he has. So I was at the right place at the right time, I guess. I was really, the gains of the revolution are incredible. I think one of the things that impressed me most was in this country, where today, of course, there are all kind of houseless tent encampments, and there's one in every park here in Minneapolis. In Venezuela, they have built 3.5 million affordable housing units in the last years. I mean, think of that. Think of that. The different, and of course we could do it too. But that's what an economy on the road to socialism can do.
Maybe Jared and Emily, we saw some housing being built. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, you know, they're pretty much a lot of them are brand new, you know, or they look really new. You know, they got ACs and everything on them, and they're continuously building them. You know, we drove by a couple that, you know, despite, you know, the blockade and the sanctions, I mean, they're still building them. They're still in the process of building more housing for people. And I mean, frankly, I mean, some of them look nicer than what you'd find here in LA, you know? So, you know, I guess the bottom line is that, you know, despite everything, you know, Venezuela is moving forward, and still able to provide all these things that even, you know, Americans don't have.
I remember specifically when we were at the beach, some of this housing just looked like really nice beachfront homes, little houses. They look very nice.
Yeah, so the day at the beach, we drove around the coast for a while, and there were like brand new homes, which, you know, in Michigan, they would look like vacation condominiums is what you would call them. But they explained to us, no, that's working class housing. You know, that's part of the 3.5 million new homes with, you know, ovens, laundry, water heaters and air conditioners included in the housing. And people pay, you know, very little to become part of those new housing projects. What what I believe they have to donate time and effort to their community as a way to pay instead of paying rent every month. I also understand that people own it. Once you move in, it's yours. You're not, you don't have a mortgage of $170,000. So
And you mentioned the shanty towns. Well, instead of tearing those down, they are rehabbing those, and in on a very steep hill, they put in a gondola so that people can easily get up and down that hill without, taking 3 or 4 hours. So that's also happening.
because if you took the bus down the mountain, it would take forever, right?
I think people walked. It wasn't even the bus; it was walking down. So
talk about something else then. I wanted to talk about our worst mission had their worst day the other day. People were telling us it's over. It's not over. It's back and worse than ever. In Venezuela, they have about 30 million people, and they have had 85,000 cases total, and they've had 725 deaths. That's it. And we were there the week that COVID hit the US, and there's another story about how we got home from there. But I want to compare those numbers to, say, Peru, where there's 32 million people, almost the same size. They have 10 times the number of cases, 860,000 versus 85,000. And then in terms of deaths, Peru has 33,600 deaths. Again, Venezuela has 725 deaths. New York State, which is under 20 million people, has 488,000 cases and 33,000 deaths. That's 46 times more deaths in New York State than in all of Venezuela. So how is it that they do this? Here's what I would say. One, they have a hospital system that's advanced. Two, they've set up neighborhood clinics so everyone has access to healthcare, where it used to be that a lot of working people, working poor, and by a lot, I mean millions, never saw a doctor until they were terminally ill. But the key is they set up COVID-19 clinics that are not connected to either the hospital, so you can still keep the hospital open and running, and they're not connected to the neighborhood clinic, so you can keep that open and running. And then they did quarantine to shut everything down, where the neighbors go out and look out for each other, and they send medical teams to every home to check on how people are doing. And so it is possible to beat this disease. It does hurt the economy of the country. It's hard, it's a hardship time, but it's a way to save lives and improve people's health care. Sarah, maybe you have more to comment about the healthcare system.
Well, we did on the second trip, we actually did go to a free clinic at the Bolivarian University and visited the hospital as well as the clinic. And actually there were quite a few Cuban doctors and nurses and healthcare people there. And so there's that kind of solidarity going on too. And as you said, their clinics, all the Chavez actually designed the healthcare system after the Cuban healthcare system, and it works, in normal times, but certainly, as you said, in times like this, it just, as in Cuba, they really are they know how to do it. They know how to do good public health and how to treat people. So I was a nurse, so I was really impressed with the healthcare system.
Can I say a couple of things?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is, people have access, maybe all the resources and technology isn't, what you would find in, an imperialist country. for everyone there, access to healthcare and access to a doctor at all times of the day. Whereas you won't see that here. And I would say that, with regards to COVID-19, I mean, there was a stark difference. Even when we, flew in March, it was before everything really exploded with the virus. I mean, we got temperature checks. Everybody coming into Venezuela got temperature checks right away, and questionnaire and everything. And that was before any cases had happened, or in Venezuela. Whereas like the United States had already had cases, and they weren't requiring masks, they weren't requiring temperature checks, they weren't requiring anything. And that's why, it's this proper precaution and planning that, Venezuela took. And, whereas it's a free for all, pure chaos in the United States. And that's why so many people have died here.
And a lot of the people dying in the U.S. are working poor, and
Absolutely.
A lot are Black and Chicano and Native American,
Right. And we see that here in Los Angeles.
And that's because of the oppression they face both in society, but also in the workplace, the type of jobs that they have access to and are promoted into. And that's something else we're going to change in this country, no doubt about it. What about food? What was our experience with eating? And I had a good time eating food in Venezuela, I have to say. Before we went there the first time, I told Jared earlier, I had read an article saying there were no eggs available in Venezuela. That in the corporate news here in the U.S., it said no eggs were available. They had culled all the chickens, and you couldn't find an egg. And I didn't tell our host, but the first thing we did after we got to the airport is we went to Chinatown. And there was a market. So we went around the market buying food so we could cook it at home. And there were eggs everywhere. There were trays of eggs on every fifth table, just piles of eggs. And I thought, well, even I'm susceptible to believing what I read in the US news, even though I should know better. They're lying about the eggs. And we ate eggs every morning for breakfast after that. So what was some of the other experiences with food that people saw?
Well, I'll say, I've been to Venezuela twice, and I know, the media here likes to say, people are starving, and well, it's just not the case. Okay. I ate very well, and people were eating very well, and delicious food. Wherever you go, there's food available. The thing about the chickens cracks me up with the eggs, because we had taken a trip out to go see postal workers, the Postal Workers Union, and I don't know how many chicken trucks passed us by. You could see their feathers just flying out the back of the trucks. So I don't think that people are starving. There's also a system called CLAP. Yeah. That is like a state-run way for people who don't have the means to. They're provided with basic food necessities, pasta and grains and different things like that, which everybody can get. It's different than how we have here of food stamps where they give you a Visa card and you go do. No, there's actual boxes of food. And if you need them, they're available. So nobody's starving. Nobody's on the street, starving, begging for, a little bit of anything. It's not like here that we have that experience. People do have food and things.
And it's delivered to your home.
Right.
So then when COVID-19 happened, 85% of homes were already having food delivery, so they could just continue, Sarah, you had some other points about food and production.
Yeah, they, well, as you said, 80% of their food was imported, and that's a problem with sanctions, and it's a problem anyway. A country shouldn't be that dependent on imports for food. So they have a whole plan to become more food sovereign, and they actually could do that, because I think it's a country where you can grow most things. And actually, when Maduro was in New York City one time, he saw all the community gardens and was inspired. So he went back to Venezuela and began a program of community gardens and community farming. And there's a ministry for that now. And we visited a couple of those. And the most impressive one we saw, though, was in a barrio called Katia, which is over 1 million people. And it was so poor, it wasn't even on the map before the revolution. And now it's just a thriving, vibrant place. And they exported that year 17 tons, or not exported, they grew, they didn't export, of course, they used it there, 17 tons of food. And they're encouraged to raise, people are encouraged to raise rabbits because that's a really good source of protein. And they're fish farms, and they just are really going all out to become a food sovereign nation. And in 3 years, I suppose it's 2 now, hope to be at 50%. So, and a lot of it's, most of it's organic on top of that. So
it's
now one more thing, though, a funny story too. When we went to this Katia, saying, you read that we're all starving here. And she was kind of a little, she wasn't starving, and she sort of did this with her body and laughed and said, actually, I need to go on a diet.
So I know one of the things that the US government is also doing is they're trying to cut off food imports from Mexico in particular, that I read about. And I think what a desperate bunch of gangsters on Wall Street. They're trying to cut people's food supply off because they don't like their election system, and they don't like, how they're orienting their society so everyone benefits together. Well, I want to move on and ask Emily about, we are some of the luckiest people in the United States because we get to visit places in Venezuela and see things that even most Venezuelans haven't been to. One of the things we got to do on our trip with a union delegation was we went to the equivalent of the space agency. And they took 3 hours to explain to us what their work was involving satellites, and they are able to have cell phones and computers and track weather and do other things that you do with high-tech satellites. But as well, we got to visit factories, which most people don't do when they go on trips. But we got to visit factories. So I'm going to ask Emily to speak to that.
When we were there, the 2 factories that we visited was a tablets and laptop factory. I remember them talking about how they are aiming to provide every single school age kid with a free laptop and or tablet. They're very enthusiastic about it. And the paper factory was also really interesting. They were doing a very similar thing about providing a backpack with school supplies free of charge to every single school age kid in Venezuela. Both of these factories were very community based and focused on providing for the children of Venezuela. It's especially interesting at the paper factory because they were fully managed by workers. The factory had previously been shut down and locked up, and they were able to break in and get the factory back running, and despite the sanctions are able to find the supplies they need to make these products. So they're very resilient and determined because they want to provide all of these products for the kids.
Do you remember when we ate lunch there, what that was like?
Yeah, they had 3 chefs on staff that made fresh food for the workers every day. And so they made us a fresh meal that day, and we got to meet them, and it was great. Definitely no shortage of food.
It was so different to I've worked in US factories, where everyone brings their own, and kind of, lunch is kind of miserable, to be honest. But there, everyone's sitting together and talking, and then they told us that they make more food than they could possibly eat, because then the workers can take it home and share it with their families. So they don't necessarily have to cook again in the evening meal. And I know from, rural health ways that you should eat your bigger meals in the daytime, in the middle of the day, and not at night anyway. And I thought, how perfect is this, that this culture is, it's so thoughtful about people and their loved ones, and it's a far stretch from the way we do things here, where, everything's individual and separate. And, they told us that the workers could, share their dishes and make it part of the menu. They had special days for that too. So kind of interesting. Any other comments about food or workplace?
Well, I'll say, despite all the sanctions, the sanctions are targeting specific goods. Like you brought up food, they're bringing, medicine, paper, so people can, so they can make for school children, which is free for school children. So these are basic goods that the United States is attacking. They want the life of the average Venezuelan to be miserable, so that they can install their Juan Guaido or whoever they want in power. And that's the history of the United States. The empire is that they want to control these things. So just that.
Yeah, just adding on to that, I remember the first day we were there, we met with a worker or representative of SURES, I believe it's pronounced. It's a human rights NGO in Venezuela. And she emphasized that the sanctions are immoral, illegal, and unjust. And she says, because they target the most vulnerable people in society the most, like elderly and children and the disabled.
It's related, but you brought up the computers in all the schools. I think that's another area that obviously Venezuela has excelled in. And there's 6 in the world in terms of kids in elementary school. All high school kids everybody goes to high school. They've built 14 or 15 new universities. And as you said, they are supplying millions of computers and textbooks to all the schools. So obviously that's a great accomplishment.
So they told us every first can bring it home. And they worked with a Portuguese firm to establish the factory. And they've now distributed so many laptops that they're making laptops for other purposes, and they've achieved their goal for every child to have one. And it's incredible to see. When we went there, this one of the workers made artwork out of the materials that the parts are shipped in. And you got one too.
Oh yeah.
So they made us this artwork, and they had a ceremony after we visited, because we're there in solidarity, and the people, the workers, some of the management, and they were in tears thanking us for visiting. It was very emotional and very moving. And they said they couldn't believe that a group of workers who are inside the empire came to visit them in solidarity and to build people-to-people ties with them, so that we could grow and build movements together for change. So, it goes beyond just kind of getting to see the relations. I also have visited twice the National Electric Company, and I have a red hat. Sometimes people think I'm a Trumper because of the red hat. But it's the Corpo Elect hat, and it has the Bolivarian Revolution on the side. And a woman worker gave it to me, so I gave her a T-shirt, an FRSO shirt. And I later saw a photo of her wearing that shirt, so that made me happy. But we visited there the first time, and again, they have a cafeteria that serves not only the 500 workers of the electric company, but also serves the community around it. And we also, the workers are militia members. And the first, the first time that there was trouble, they had right-wing people coming and shooting rifles off the highway overpasses at the workplace. And those right-wingers were surprised because the militia members amongst the workers went to their lockers and got their weapons and started shooting back. And it didn't take more than a minute or two for those right-wingers to run away. They were brave when they thought nobody would fight them, but as soon as others appeared to give what they were getting, they disappeared. So they're not just a workforce with a strong union, but with the ability to defend the gains of the revolution. So at the end of our first tour there, one of the PSUV leaders said, "So did you guys see the management? You saw the guys in the suits and with the clipboards?" And we were all kind of going, no. And he says, "That's because there aren't any." He said, "We run this ourselves." He said, "We have big meetings and we decide who's going to do what work, and we make a plan together, and everyone is part of the decision making. And it doesn't mean they all agree, but they all come to a decision and then they carry it out. And you have people who know that, well, maybe this job's more difficult, but they're willing to go do that work and maybe let someone with less physical capacity do some other job, So it was really, it's like a new day there in terms of those big jobs. Well, I think we should move on to, I want to talk about what the US is doing in relationship to Venezuela. And I thought we would talk about our own experiences. It's okay if people have other things to add, but again, I'm going to go to Sarah first. You had an interesting experience given my visit to the National Electric Company. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, the first part, I was late in getting there, first of all, because the US airlines have cut off flights. So it takes a long time now to get to Venezuela. Obviously, the US is trying to isolate them and make it impossible for people to get there. But when I got there, they were in the middle of on the big hydroelectric plant, or just outside of Caracas, both on the computer and on the power lines, and then on the there had been fires in some of the substations after that. So power was out for 7 days. We did have it in our hotel, but mostly it was out, and there was no looting. Of course, people really pulled together. Clap boxes were delivered. There were long lines for transportation. Maduro said no school or work for 7 days because obviously it would have been too hard to do that. So they got through that. And I think it happened a couple of more times, but another plot foiled. And the people knew, that was the other reason the people knew who had done it, and they know who the enemy is, so.
Yeah, there were reports that the cyber attack originated out of Chicago, where I'm from.
Yeah.
And I also know there were people out sabotaging, shooting generators and whatnot. And, you have right-wing people, kind of like the Michigan militia types, but they're Venezuelan, They love rich people, and they'll go commit acts of violence to help the rich people's agenda. Another experience when we arrived at the airport in Caracas.
Yeah, I think it was in March, either the day before, the right-wing opposition called for a march on the Capitol and for the government to step down or something like that. But they also set fire and burned down the factory with all the voting machines because they're having their election. They were going to have it earlier this year, but because of that, they moved it to December. But they, voting machines, so they don't want they tried to stop the elections from happening, you know. The interesting thing is that while they did do these acts of terrorism and whatnot, the supporters of the government had a counter march in which we got to attend. Over 500,000 people marched in the streets to support the government and against the right-wing opposition.
Yeah,
So,
Emily, you were going to speak about the march and what we saw there. Why don't you tell us something about it?
I remember the march happened, I believe it was 2 days after the attacks on their voting machines. It was somewhere around like 600,000 people. The streets were completely crowded. I climbed up like a pole thing there from in either direction. I couldn't see the end of people, and it was just shoulder to shoulder packed. People were carrying banners, singing songs, playing instruments, like singing chants. It was just a very, very enthusiastic crowd of 600,000 people just there 2 days later to show their support.
So you
I've
have
never
to
seen
ask.
anything like it.
You have to ask yourself, what kind of pro-democracy activist, which is what the U.S. press calls these people, goes and burns down the warehouse that has all the voting machines and materials. It sounds almost like a Trump plan for this country. Almost. I'm exaggerating, but yeah, the march was just huge. And I remember there was a corner, we were trying to get to a corner to turn onto the main street, and we never made it to the turn because there were so many people. And then one of the things I loved, you guys might laugh at me, but I loved that there were people dancing during the march. So I went and joined a group of people who were dancing during the march. And it was a lot of fun. And then we met the vice president of PDVSA, the oil company. And he was educated in Texas, of all places, I think Austin, if I remember right. And he spoke English very well. And he was very pleasant and happy to meet us. And, he was in charge of finding new oil and figuring out how to convert tar sands into the march. But, given that we're from the US, people are often happily surprised to meet us because, as Sarah said, it's really hard to get there. Another thing about the voting machines was we were lucky to meet with the head of the National Electoral Council. Her name is Tibise Lucena. And what we learned from her, besides how she planned to overcome this disaster, because she has run fair and free elections for more than 20 years now, and she is very determined to do it again in December. We learned from her that Venezuela has 5 branches of government, where they have a judiciary and a legislature, and they also have a 4th arm of the government, which is the National Electoral Council. And then there's a 5th arm, which is the people, the sovereign people of the country. So you have to have an avenue for people besides elections to participate in government. And those are both ideas that came from Bolivar back in the 1800s. So Bolivar is not just something that they talked about historically. They've actually taken his writings and studied them and incorporated them into the new constitutions. So the new state that works for the benefit of working people is taking up Bolivar's ideas directly. So there's just all these interesting things about it. I wanted to say that the first time I went was April 30th, 2 years ago. Well, it was a few days before April 30th, but I think it was the second day we were there. For whatever reason, I decided to wake up early. So I woke up at 6 a.m. and I started hearing a lot of noise, and I heard a woman screaming at the top of her lungs, screaming religious slogans in Spanish, oh my God, we have freedom. in Spanish. And I thought, this is really odd. We were kind of in a middle-class neighborhood. Well, what it turned out was it was the attempted coup d'etat at the airport, which was like a mile and a half away from us. And so Juan Guaido and other right-wingers, Leopoldo, they were trying to overthrow the elected government. But unfortunately for them, the people weren't having it. And more so, their US-backed plot had a lot of problems because there were people loyal to Chavez who were part of the planning. And I mean, people loyal to Maduro who were part of the planning. And that they knew all along that this attempted coup d'etat was going to happen. And some of the soldiers on the ground who had been tricked, they figured out what was happening and turned against it quickly too. Unfortunately, 4 people did die through no fault of their own, but because of Guaido. And we were able to go down to the Miraflores, the seat of the government, the palace. And we went there about 4 or 5 hours after the coup attempt. And boy, were we treated well. People were so excited that the gringos had come from the US to stand in solidarity against the attempted coup. And once people found out we were there, there were probably 40 or 50,000 people there, even though it was many hours after the coup attempt. They were there to defend their president, to defend their revolution. And then everyone wanted to start interviewing us and taking photos with us. And it was really like a celebration at that point, and a celebration of the revolution standing its ground. So
Tom, when we were there, it was just months after Guaido had made his announcement with, what was it, Elliot Abrams at his side, John Bolton, whoever. And they really were worried about U.S. attacks at that time. So it was the same thing, the protection of the presidential palace. And they really organized it. And there were contingents there, unions, community groups, day in and day out, making sure, and they were armed, they were there ready for any kind of right-wing attack. And when we were there, it was the oil workers who were had their stint. So yeah, they at the drop of a hat, obviously the people know where to go and what to do.
That's right. And the next day for us was May 1st, May Day. And being from Chicago, May Day's in my heart. And we saw almost 2 million people out in the streets. Well, you couldn't see 2 million people. We could only see about 1/3 of that where we were. And we just walked amongst the crowds, and it was joyful and happy and powerful. And we saw things like the Socialist Cement Workers Union. I was like, we need one of those in our city. And we saw the militia members. So there's a militia that's organized throughout the whole country. And, many of the commanders would be people who were formerly in the military. It could be even the grandma from your community organization might be one of the higher officers in the militia. So they turn out and march, and that's who went to invade after our last trip in March. It was the local militia members. There's a famous picture of a fishing village where an older woman is standing over the US mercenaries who were caught, 2 of them from Texas. And unfortunately for them, they're going to spend a long stint in prison in Venezuela for thinking they could just walk in and overthrow the government. But yeah, it's the fisher folk and the local people who caught them. And just incredible to see. The accountants were out marching together as a delegation on May Day, right? I never saw accountants together in my life. The farmers came in from rural areas. It was just terrific, row after row of workers showing off what they did, and a lot of pride in who they are. So, Emily, maybe you thing happened about 2 weeks after we were in Venezuela with, we visited a beach area. You remember
There
the
was a lag or it froze, so I didn't hear most of what you said.
you remember the last day where we went to the beach?
Yeah.
I think we should tell too, it wasn't all work for us. So I want to talk about our trip to the beach a little bit,
Oh, yeah. That last day we went to a part of the city that's right along the shoreline. We got a bucket of beer and shared it. We got chairs underneath an umbrella. We went swimming and we just hung out for about 5 hours. Then we went and just got donuts, went for a drive along the shore, just got to do some sightseeing and see the beach and the mountains.
And remember we met some airport workers who had moonshine?
Right?
They were really proud to share their moonshine with
That
us.
was some good quality moonshine, just saying.
And, they were part of the union at the airport, the maintenance union. We also met their daughter who was learning public administration at the university. She's the first person in their family to have access to the university. And she planned on becoming part of a government ministry in the future. So even when we were relaxing and hanging out, we still got to learn interesting things. And just a few miles from that beach, right around where the pastry shop was that we stopped, that's another place where a few weeks later, the US had some mercenaries come on boats and try to invade. And they were all killed getting on the beach there at the docks. There's a lot of people paying attention to what's going on. Just 2 months ago, another US former Iraq soldier was caught with suspicious materials near one of the oil refineries. So he's sitting in jail, sitting in prison now. And, the US attacks are relentless and they're going to keep coming. Unless people in this country, especially the youth who are into socialism and, looking for something that goes beyond Bernie's politics, unless they start organizing and, speaking out against this. So we're getting near the end of this. And I wanted to say that, the trips we've taken, two of the trips were hosted by the Transportation Workers Union. And Jared, you met the leader of that before the rest of us. Can you tell us about him and about their union a little bit?
Yeah, I can talk about the meeting. And so we got to meet with Francisco Torrealba, which he's the president of the Venezuelan Workers Confederation, class of the PSUV. So he's like big. Well, he's not a big guy, but he's but he's an important guy, But in August, we went to the first international meeting of workers in solidarity with the Bolivarian government and its people. And basically it called for solidarity from workers around the world to stand with Venezuela during all these attacks. And so there were a lot of representatives from over 25 countries. And, we represented, me and another comrade, Gabriela. But, most of them were from Latin America. So we got to meet a lot of people from other countries. But there was also a bunch of trade unionists from Venezuela that attended. And they were super excited to see us. They see all the attacks coming from Trump and from before. The Trumps are going to continue even if Trump doesn't win again. And so there's a little bit surprised to see workers in the United States to support them and support what's going on over there. So we got to meet with them and take a lot of pictures. And even Maduro spoke later. And he, spoke to the crowd, and his old union buddies were shouting at him like, "Hey, Maduro!" And he shouted back at him because he was a bus driver. He was a union worker. What kind of we're so used to in America having billionaire presidents, instead of a bus driver president, so that's the big, it's a big difference right there. But anyways, back to the point. We attended a meeting, and basically, there's going to be more meetings, but in the future, in November, they've called for anti-imperialist working class platform, and that's put on by the, called for by the PSUV and Torrealba and all them. And basically what it's calling for is, a platform organized for workers against imperialism. That's like it in a nutshell. So they want to build an agenda to support the struggle against, U.S. imperialism, but also European imperialism as well, and to promote the struggle against imperialism and colonialism, to bring about full independence to peoples, to break from capitalist exploitation and forms of oppression. So it's important for us to be a part of that, and other people to support this and join in on it, because it's a workers' movement, and we can do a lot to support them from here. And workers should, take a look at what's going on in Venezuela. Workers in the United States take a look at what's going on, and kind of reflect on what's going on here, and why a country under attack can move forward, and yet this country can't. More people get involved.
So I think if anyone is interested, who's watching this, we can have you contact the FRSO at our website. You can write to us at our website, and if it makes sense, we can have you invited to the conference on November 12th and 13th. And so it's a meeting of the working class who are anti-imperialist, or the anti-imperialist working class platform. It's either way you like to say it, it's the same thing. So Sarah or Emily, do you have anything else to share before we close off here?
No.
I was just going to say, I think this is a really exciting, important initiative. So I think people should check it out. And it's an online thing, of course. So there they are in the crosshairs of U.S. imperialism, which is, I guess, one reason why they're doing it. But they are taking on the U.S. empire and doing it in a global kind of way. So
and I'm glad to be their friends here.
yeah.
And I want to say, long live
Yeah.
Maduro, viva Maduro.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any questions?
We do.
All right, let's have them. I need to see it.
Well, I would say for the first question, they should whoever the questioner's mom should listen to this webinar and get an idea of why Latin American countries and Mexico should support Venezuela.
Okay. Can you read the question? And
Sure. My mom says Jorge Ramos, big-time U.S. reporter for Spanish-speaking news, speaks very poorly of Venezuela and Maduro. Why should Mexicans, Chicanos, or any Latinos support Venezuelans?
I'll take a jab at Jorge Ramos. You got to remember who he works for. First of all, he works for corporate media. They put him on the air for a reason. But I'll say this is that, remember, what Jorge Ramos or before him, the United States has always been supporting U.S. wars, U.S. intervention, whether it be from, Venezuela to 1970 and Chile to even Mexico itself. The United States is intervening in Mexico. Or Guatemala, or all of Latin America, or all over the world, from, Indochina, so we got to remember is that, he's a spokesperson for imperialism. and that, you know, the people of the world have never gained from U.S. intervention, you know, in their country. So I would say that.
All right.
Want to
There's
say
another,
Yeah. Oh, you
there's
got
another
it now.
question that can someone describe the role U.S. supported governments in Colombia and Brazil play in U.S. interference in Venezuela?
Well, certainly a lot of the recent attacks are coming right out of Colombia and planned in Colombia. I think all the people that have been mentioned that are now sitting in jail came out of Colombia.
That's right.
And when I was there, actually a report had just early on or several years ago, there was a drone attack on Maduro when he was giving a speech and he was almost killed. And a report came out just the week before we got there the first time that actually that had been planned in Colombia along with US support. So you know, they work hand in glove with the US, unfortunately, in trying to destabilize.
Emily, do you remember the name of the house we stayed in?
Robert Serra's home.
Yeah. So we stayed in his home and he was actually murdered. He was the youngest member of the PSUV, the youngest person ever elected to the National Assembly, kind of the upper house of their system, their government system. And he and his young wife were both murdered there. And the murderers were actually from a Colombian drug cartel. Tortured them and murdered them inside the house. And, you know, people don't always understand, you know, how vicious the US is acting in other countries where they're the ones motivating these attacks. I'll say this, though. Both Colombia and Brazil cannot just take orders from the US. The US is asking them both to interfere in Venezuela, and the US is getting rebuffed at times because the governments in Brazil and Colombia, even though they're in Brazil, it's a far right government, and in Colombia, it's definitely, you know, a right-wing government with narco trafficking elements. You know, the wealthy narco traffickers are part of it. They say to the US, no, thank you, not right now. We don't think we have the capacity. They give them those kinds of answers because they don't really want to fight a war with Venezuela, where they know that every neighborhood has militias, and that, you know, under Chavez, who was in the military himself, and now under Maduro, the dedication and the feeling of national pride of the military is the highest it's ever been. They are a Bolivarian revolutionary military. They are not just a defense force like other countries might have, or a career opportunity path for some officers. They have become a new type of military that will fight to defend their country from the US or these other right-wing governments around them. And so the stakes would be very high if Colombia and Brazil thought they could attack. I would dare to say that those governments in those countries would fall, and that there would be revolutions following up on that. The US likewise cannot just invade Venezuela. It will be a meat grinder. There will be tens of thousands of US body bags coming home. The US couldn't even invade Panama back when I was a student. They had to retreat and try a second time. So imagine that times 100. That's what Venezuela is. They are prepared for war. You know, the US is playing a dangerous game if they think they can just invade them. Anyone have any book suggestions? I do not. I know our friend Sean Orr is writing a book, so I might have a suggestion in about 6 months for a book.
I'll say book recommendation, not exactly about South America, but does definitely talk about Brazil and Chile and Guatemala in it. But it's more focused on Indonesia, which is the Jakarta method, which it's all related in the CIA's involvement in Latin America as well. So that's one to check out. I just read it, so that's why I'm recommending it.
Actually, there is one. Our friend Dan Kovalik has a book about Venezuela that's worth reading.
Also, Orinoco Tribune is a really good place to go online for daily news.
Orinoco.
Yeah, Orinoco Tribune.
Can you spell Orinoco for people?
Orinoco, right? Does that seem right? Orinoco.
Yep. So that's a good
area, I think, in Venezuela.
Someone's asking, how do you talk to people who are like progressive on other issues, but not so much on Venezuela? Any advice for them?
If I bring it back to the role of U.S. imperialism, despite what you think about or what you may think about another country, do you support the United States' involvement in deposing other governments? And usually most people will say no to that. Most people. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to keep moving. I want to answer the next question, which is today in Bolivia, there's elections and the left wing is due to win those elections. The MAS party is supposed to win. They're up by 10 points in polls. But, this is a country that suffered a coup during the last election. And they chased Evo Morales out of the country. He's in Argentina trying to support the MAS and the victory of the left. But, you have a vicious right wing in that country that's very wealthy. And, looked down on and mistreated indigenous people, mistreated the majority. And who backs them up full hilt is the United States. And so you have a tricky situation. It's different than Venezuela. In Venezuela, what guarantees the electoral system? The people do. And the fourth arm of government, the National Electoral Commission, does. But you can't push around the Bolivarian revolution from the top and with generals declaring their opinion about things. You have to realize there's a big difference between Venezuela and its system and its constitution, and that's due to the gains of the revolution versus still in a process of trying to consolidate the gains. And so there may be a problem with the US backing the right wing and the military, saying, no, you're not going to take power again, and installing yet another right wing person in office who has no right to be there, but Wall Street wants it and the rich people locally want it. So hopefully, the movement is strong enough to install a new president that's from MAS, but I think it's a very up in the air situation. Just as people in the US are worried that Trump won't leave office because he says there's corruption in the electoral system, or they create these problems and then claim them as corruption, but they're the ones who are corrupt. So that's similar in Bolivia. The US is becoming more like the little right-wing parties that they support in these other countries. So we'll see how it turns out. Finally, there's a question about crime. What did you see in terms of crime and punishment? How do you think the police treated people in Venezuela?
I didn't see any crime or ever feel afraid at any point.
Yeah, we walked in public in the cities. We went out to the country and, we stopped at, roadside diners with it. We met, regular people when we were out and about.
I do remember getting some dirty looks from some of the like more bourgeois people in one of the fancy restaurants we went to.
Well, true enough. That's a point well taken. We ate well, so we would go to the restaurants in the wealthier neighborhoods, and everyone's curious who we are, where we're from, and a lot of people would do walk-bys past our table to try to listen to us. And often if they figured out we were from the US and that we were there, with pro-government people, because people had hats or shirts on that said PSUV, they might not be too friendly to us. But amongst working people, we went to, neighborhoods and workplaces that are filled with working people just like us, and never had a problem, never felt threatened. We had an interesting discussion one night with one of the National Guard, who sometimes act like police. And they explained how crime and punishment has been transformed by the revolution, that their goal is to talk people out of the life of crime. And they do punish people in prisons, but now the focus is on reform, and that you become part of the revolution upon it. Leaving prison. So one of the National Guard we met actually used to be a prison guard who, when the coup happened, he was in the prison guarding Chavez when the right wing attempted their coup against Chavez. So that was just incredible to hear that he had been one of the guards, because he was obeying orders, but certainly put him in an odd place where now he's one of the supporters of the Bolivarian Revolution. So, yeah, I think the crime situation used to be very difficult, but, there's no more drugs in Venezuela. You can't buy drugs, you can't find them. Criminals are complaining that their livelihood is gone because they can't rob and steal and deal drugs. And so they have to find new jobs, and to me, that's something I would like to have happen in this country, where we take the profit out of drugs and put it into rehab situations, and we change our society. But to get there, I think we need to have a revolution here, and we should keep learning from Venezuela. All right, well, I think we're going to leave it at that. And I want to finish by saying solidarity with the comrades. Solidarity.
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 And, long live Maduro, long live the Bolivarian Revolution. I was in the original Bolivarian circle in the US that supported the revolution in the early 2000s. I was one of the founders of the Bolivarian Circle in Chicago. And I'm happy that today I get to bring a lot more people with me to act in solidarity with the revolution and with the PSUV and the other parties of the left down in Venezuela. Thank you, Michaela, for hosting us. You do a lot of behind the scenes work, and we want everyone to know we appreciate you. Michaela Martinazzi. So, salute.